I would like to welcome everybody on behalf of the European Platform for Democratic Elections, which is an association of 16 domestic citizen election observation organizations from the Eastern Partnership countries and from European Union and Norway, which is not a member of European Union. Sometimes we forget about it. Anyway, we have here today our colleagues and experts in election-related issues. Alex Shlyk, the former head of the election department of ODIHR, Olga Aivazovska, who is the chairperson of the Civil Network OPORA from Ukraine, and Sylwester Oracz, who is a campaign finance expert of the Polish Accountability Foundation, a newest EPDE members organization, which was established in 2016, I guess, right? And we want to talk about political finance today. So both in the EU countries and in the eastern neighborhood of the EU, there is a wide variety of regulatory approaches to political finance. And the overall trend, which is always an issue, as to how far we should regulate such issues, is that the trend is that the more trust in the society, the less regulations we will see, the less trust. The more tight the regulations are, but despite all those differences related to norms and regulations, there are at least three universally shared principles. The first one is the principle of equality of opportunity, which refers to the fairness related to the access of political actors, parties, candidates to financial resources. The second principle is the principle of transparency, which is about reporting and disclosure of political finance. And the third principle is the principle of accountability, which is related to oversight regulations and sanction mechanisms. But today we see a continuous shift in political campaigning from the, I would say, offline world into the online world, which brings new challenges to all those principles. As example, we will talk for sure about online fundraising or advertising via social media. These two are bringing new challenges to basically all those principles, right? To the transparency of spending, to the equal access to resources, and to the oversight mechanisms. So the theme of this site even today is how should we regulate political finance? What are the best and perhaps also the worst practices if it comes to raise and spend money for political campaigning? And finally, what can we as civil society actors, what can we do, how can we contribute to more transparency and equality? That said, let's start the discussion with Olga. Olga, since 20 years, we've been observing constant development of an extensive extensive regulatory framework related to party and campaign financing in Ukraine. What are the challenges that we see still now at the moment in Ukraine, and what kind of reforms have been implemented in Ukraine? If you give us a more general overview of Ukrainian regulatory framework. Thank you. You need more glasses?
No, I have already 2 glasses. So I will try to be not so boring, because it's about 20 years. And I'm a little bit shocked that Adam knows too much about me, because my first election happened in 2002, and I had a role of observer. So then I participated in electoral process as a member of electoral commission during presidential election in 2004, and then OPORA was established because of this huge request from society to have free and fair election after the Orange Revolution. So, but this is like pre-story. I'm going to talk about serious things like money in electoral processes. Money is a huge part of any of campaigning. We know about that very well. And the crucial changes what happened during the last 20 years that we are living in other digital world. That's why we have enough tool, if we have political will and very active civil society organization to fight for transparency of political finance. At the same time, it doesn't look like we have too much partners on this track. For example, after 2020, OPORA sent a claim to European Court for Human Rights because we wanted to have access to daily base expenditures from financial funds, from electoral funds, because it's really relevant if we have access to the final pre-report about expenditures for 5 days before election day, but nobody in between, like society, not specialists or observers, can't be enough aware what does it mean, this sum of money, where candidates or political parties took this amount of resources, how they spent it. It doesn't matter, because these reports doesn't have any influence into political will, into political decision, how voters will vote because of their knowledges where these political parties and candidates took this money and how they are using it during electoral campaigning. And do we have a real numbers, or it's just a fake for Central Election Commission and nobody caring what is going on in reality? So after that understanding, because after 2014, we have some updates in electoral legislation, and we can analyze the details in financial reports, but after the end of campaigning. Our idea in 2012, when we as civil society organization promoted idea to have transparency of the electoral funds, was to give a chance regular voters to have access to information, not just know how much money political parties spend it, but to have enough information what is the real source of the financial resources for political players who will fighting or who are fighting for the mandate. And we sent it and claim to the European Court for European Court for Human Rights in Strasbourg, and last week we had an answer. So it's not about rights. So because Central Election Commission answered to our request to have access to information about expenditures before these 5 days till the end of electoral campaign, that there is a banking secret. So if we have a banking secret but 5 days before election day, it's a secret, and then this money and these expenditures and reports are published and producing. So what was the differences between that part of time and this part of time? Why the expenditures from electoral fund is a secret data 5 days before elections, but then it's public data? Because there is a huge public request to have access to this information on daily basis. That's why our far away mission or idea on this topic to have access to the electoral fund information, how political parties and candidates spending their money on daily basis on web portal of Central Election Commission or some other institutions. But when we are talking regular problems, it's not only about transparency, it's about content of these budgets. According to Ukrainian legislation and new electoral code, which was adopted in 2020 by Ukrainian Parliament, Верховна Рада України, we have like regulation which give us a chance to understand what is relevant for expenditures and regular political funds, what is not. And according to current practices, we have like shadow part of financing each of electoral campaigning and open part. And this is very tricky things because there is no human resources in official electoral funds. How you can organize electoral campaigning without human resources? So the staff of the headquarters of political parties or candidates is not, we are not including into these expenditures. We know very well how much money political party paying to like citizen for present themselves in electoral commission. And when we are talking about Ukraine, it's 29,000 of electoral commissions. So it's more than 500,000 of people which are participating on electoral process as member of electoral commission. And we have a tricky thing in legislation that you can't pay members of electoral commissions, or you can pay to observers because it will be voter bribery or bribery of members of electoral commissions or observers. We have a new norm in our criminal code about that. So, and already during last 2 years, we have this new norm that, and it was a part of big consensus from political groups. If you want to have regulations about voter bribery process, we will include into that norm to criminal code observers, members of electoral commissions, and candidates. So, because there is different type of bribery, you can bribe candidate to change his or her name, surname, father's name, and you will have a twins in the ballot. Is it bribery? Yes, it's a political technology. That's why you have to be aware how it is going on, to give a chance to police or investigators to investigate this type of manipulation. But you will have such position that it's possible to bribe candidates. And when we are talking about commissioners and observers from political parties and candidates, this is a story about double standards. Because everyone in Ukraine knows that political parties paying money for their representatives in electoral commissions. But we have a norm in electoral code that you can't pay them because it's bribery of members of electoral commissions, and there is a sanctions for those sides who are going to pay this money to, as I remember, 10 years in prison. So, and everyone paying money. And everyone knows that everyone paying this money for the members of electoral commissions.
But Olga, if I can ask at this, just directly to what you said, it seems that it's a kind of technical question, actually, you know, to include the staff into the into the, you know, the whole payments lists of the parties should not be a
It's not just
big
a
deal.
technical questions, because you can like develop a scheme. You will pay people like agitators, but it will be like a shadow voter bribery campaign. So you will pay 1,000 hryvnias for one person. You will give this person one paper, and will sign with this side just agreement that you are my agitator. How you will have enough evidence that it's voter bribery, not payment for fake agitator to agitate someone? So this is very tricky thing, as with members of Electoral Commission, because there is no easy solution for this, this problem. From one hand, it's like mafia, because everyone knows that everyone doing that. From another, if you have like law enforcement administrative resource, you will use this information against your counterparts or other sides, opposition, I don't know, and it is very easy doing thing. So I'm talking so long about humanity and people in electoral process, because there are many like details in this questionnaire, and we have to be enough aware that there is no very easy solution. Or you have to find like you have to find such solution to propose professional members of Electoral Commission and to pay them officially through like state budget or local budgets. But this is another track of the problem, like how not give a chance to misuse of this administrative resource in the future. And another part of the questionnaire is about capacity and sustainability of the state bodies or institutions to monitor the system and problems and expenditures, not just accept the reports and then done, as we have had many years ago when Central Election Commission received the report with like one line that President Poroshenko and candidate Poroshenko and his political party ordered for national-wide campaigning 10,000 newspapers for agitation. So can you believe that the national-wide campaigning will have only 10,000 newspapers for advertising? Of course, it's a fake number. It's a fake sum. But how to investigate the source and the real expenditures, the source of these numbers and the real expenditures? That's why we had a chance to reload somehow the institutions which has capacity, knowledges, and sustainability, not just accept the reports, but monitor what is going on inside. Is it a real number or fake? That's why in Ukraine we have already not just Central Election Commission, which is working with this data, but National Agency for Prevention Corruption, which has a responsibility to be aware and to monitor all political finance. Because you can spend some money before official start of campaigning, and these expenditures will not be included into the final report or preliminary report, and you will have enough space for manipulation with resources. You can organize even campaigning, huge campaigning with voter bribery, then to tell that it's just my, from my heart, to willing to present some resources, some social good services in need to people because they are not voters. One day before this official start of campaigning. And last point, so I have many other points, but I know that it's difficult to listen. Last point about cyberspace. This is a crucial time when we have new challenges, because there is no just few stakeholders in a process. So 20 years ago, we had like power groups, opposition, civil society, media, and everyone were on physical space in a border of one, I don't know, country or state under the jurisdiction of the courts. And if you have political will, you can organize free and fair elections, as we had in 2006. It was like parliamentary campaigning when President Yushchenko was president. But after that, we had 2012, when it was crucial and falsified parliamentary campaign. But now we have another part of stakeholders of the process. It's like business, big business, global business, owners of the social platforms with access to these platforms from different parts of the world. And it's not so easy to regulate somehow their work. We need to start negotiations with them to cut somehow their financial interest and, in the process, and to be enough open. Like Facebook in Ukraine in 2019 open financial library of political advertising in Ukraine. And we can calculate how much money political groups and third parties, which are very close to these political groups, spent money, and what does it mean for the final reports or the transparency of the financial expenditures. And what we saw, I have just a few data. During 1 year in Ukraine, OPORA monitored and gathering the data about 1,023 political advertising materials in like open space for $2.2 million. But when we are talking about like day of
silence.
Silence day, election day, we calculated only during last campaign in 165,000 political advertising materials. And the number of the materials during silent day from last presidential and parliamentary campaigning in 2019 and last local campaigning in 2020, increasing in 8 times. So during 1 year, the situation was increased about shadow money or like violation of agitation on silent day, election day, increasing in crucial manner, like in times, not just from time to time. And now we have a track with reforms, but I will not talk too much about that. But we are on this track because of the status of candidate to EU, and Ukraine had an obligation to change legislation about media. Because of that, like window of opportunity, OPORA and other organizations organize advocacy because media has its own role during elections and in between elections. And we prepared and already registered amendments to electoral code about media in electoral process and about political advertising. And we have some new norms about political advertising in social media, and started to talk and to build a trust and relationship between, for example, Central Election Commission, civil society, and representatives of Facebook, because they have to negotiate between themselves how to build like channels of communication, how to be during electoral campaign. If everyone or each and everyone from civil society, observers, organization will find some finding about huge amount of money which we are spending through social media, but Central Election Commission or National Agency for Prevention Corruption will not have access to those who can give real evidences.
I think, Olga, we
testimonies about
can
that.
talk about this important reforms. I would love to hear more and more about Ukraine, but if I would know that there are so many troubles in Ukraine, I would start with Sylwester first. And, but we have only half an hour, so Sylwester. There was a couple of issues raised by Olga. One of them was access to information. I guess this is the big issue in Poland. Right?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, obviously we do have a lot of data in Poland, but we do not have them accessible for anyone who is interested, right? So we have Act on access to public information, similar to Freedom of Information Act, like in US, right? But in practice, with all the possible powers parties are avoiding to share the information, sometimes it lands in the court, and NGOs are basically suing parties to get the information they requested, and it takes years sometimes to actually get that information. There were several cases publicly known about it. Yes, I would say that the main issue with Polish financial system is that first the data we have comes afterwards. It's not an issue that we don't get it 5 days before election day. We get it 3 months after the election day. And we don't get the actual spendings. We get very generic, very high level report which doesn't tell who paid whom for what. It basically says, this is how much money we collected, this is how much we spent on this and that and this aspect, and that's it. So basically that report is like 3-4 pages, which half of that is, address, name of the party, etc., right? So this is not actually helpful. If NGO wants to actually challenge that, they need to ask Central Election Commission for the actual bills which are available. But this is paper, and you need to process a lot of paperwork before you actually get anything meaningful. NGOs technically have right to challenge that and be a side of the proceeding in Central Election Commission before they accept the report, but I haven't heard about a case where it was actually used due to fact, how that process is complicated and troublesome. The other side of the coin is, we recently in Poland established some new law called Anti-Corruption Act. This is basically an act which is changing several codes, several laws. One of the important things which has a tiny chance to change a little bit stuff for us is fact that currently parties are obligated to publish their donations they received and to publish agreements they made with third parties, right? They have 2 weeks for that. Basically, that law was established last year and come to force on July this year. I can tell you that at this moment, most of the parties has not fulfilled their obligation, their legal obligation to publish that data, even though that many of those parties I personally called and asked, where is your registry? It should be on your website, and they are still avoiding to share that information. Obviously, there are some methods to motivate those parties, and Central Electoral Commission is oversighting the situation, right? But to be honest, fines are very little. I don't think they will change anything significantly. But in the other side, I think they can be used as some sort of, political tool against the other side, let's say, of the political, the other political side, right? So, and that applies only to parties, as I said, right? It doesn't apply to party list committees, which are actually running the elections, which are actually the ones which are taking part into elections. So technically speaking, in Poland we have two parallel political systems, I would say. Like one permanent, which is built on top of parties, and each election there are temporal entities, legal entities called committees, and committees can be built by parties, can be built by NGOs, can be built by just a group of interested citizens in starting in elections. And that rules doesn't apply to committees, right? So basically, when we need more of that information, we have less of the information, right? So this is one of the issues we can easily see. Obviously, parties, I mean, one of the issues which goes down to why we don't have that data is that parties are publishing those data on their own websites. They are not required to publish, to report it somewhere centrally. So therefore, if you want to verify the actual, if the obligation is fulfilled, you need to visit every website of every single party. In Poland, we have 100 parties almost, right? So basically, it's troublesome to get it. So maybe one of the things which we could improve in Poland is to move that data somewhere centrally and to give some powers, actual powers to Central Electoral Commission or Central Electoral Office, which is supporting that body, to be equipped with some investigative powers and to have that information available real time, anytime on their desk, instead of asking parties for the data.
Thank you, Sylwester. I guess this is an important point, and we can get back to it a bit later. Alex, if you hear it, if you hear the report from Ukraine and from Poland, what is your impression? You have a huge experience in observing different aspects of electoral process, not only the political finance, but you're also author of our new publication, which is a comparison of regulations of a couple of countries in the EU and the EU regulations, because this is another layer, another level of regulations. Yeah, what's your impression? Maybe should the parties should be the actor of change in this system. They should be interested in having transparent rules and to see what the others are doing.
Thanks, Adam. First of all, it's an honor to be speaking next to Olga and to Sylwester from the citizen groups, because as you will hear from me, and I will sort of lift the veil of suspense right away, I do think that it is the civil society actors who will be leading the way on this, rather than the political actors. But let me get to that slowly. This will be the conclusion, but I'm leading to that from the very beginning of my understanding of how this whole sphere of political finance seems to be functioning. First of all, and first thing I will say, is that politics is an extremely creative occupation, where we, the experts and the civil society organizations, where we see a problem or a conflict in the law, the politicians very often see an opportunity. That is why we like them so much. This is why we elect them, because they are creative when they turn their creativity for the good cause. But in the political finance, very often the political actors turn their creativity not to a particularly good cause. And the bad laws or the insufficient regulation could lead to loopholes which the political actors are more than eager to explore, because they are, and to exploit, because they remain within the remit of the legal framework, but at the same time achieve their own political objectives for why they are in politics. And I think that where the solution comes from is really from the general orientation of the policy and the perception of what matters in the society. And this is where the story is a bit more complicated than we would expect. Yeah, we would think, maybe by now we don't think that, but maybe 10 years ago we were still using this perspective that there are countries that have graduated into the club of democracies. Typically they would join the European Union and everything will be fantastic and super easy and nice and honest in their electoral processes. But now I think we can clearly see that around the European Union and inside the European Union there is a huge disparity, and not in terms of the extent of regulation, but in terms of approaches to what matters in the sphere of political finance. And I will just draw on a couple of examples. I think Ukraine has made an enormous progress in the political finance regulation because of the Ukraine's orientation on the anti-corruption efforts. And I think that was leading the way there, and the anti-corruption bodies, together with the civil society, were making a huge progress there. In Moldova, the most recent example is the reform of the Central Election Commission and the reform of the legislation that accompanies it, to give more powers to oversight, regulation, to give more muscle, and to give more motivation to regulate political finance. In Poland, as Sylwester has already highlighted, it's a very closed system where the political actors are not particularly interested in sharing their information, and at times I have the impression that the government authorities are not very interested in changing that either, because in the end of the day, they do listen to political actors. Just to give another example, Slovakia has a very big orientation towards anti-corruption since the recent couple of years, and we can see a very clear change in the amount of data that is available for the analysts of the political finance. But, speaking in very more general terms, Adam has already mentioned, there is not so many commitments and standards in the sphere of political finance. And what we are operating by are three major principles of equality of opportunity, of transparency, and of accountability, which makes the first two actually operational. And this is exactly what we focus this study of the comparing the regulations in the European Union member states and at the European Union level. I'll leave the EU level aside because that's a whole different story. But what we have seen in this study is that a lot of the things that we have been observing for a long time in the sphere of political finance are not new because we are entering this cyber world. Many of these things we have seen in the past already. It's just that they are taking a slightly different shape, and the priority of issues, how critical they are, is also changing because of the cyberspace. Our today's event is a little bit more focused on the online world because this presents more challenges, but also a bit more opportunities for us to see what is going on in the sphere of political finance. First is I want to highlight that, for example, some of the things that we are talking about now, like third parties, yes? The reason we're talking about them a lot right now is because the third parties go unnoticed in the online political financing. But so do a lot of the actual political actors. Many don't have to report on their finances and their expenditures online. Many don't have to report on how they collected their money using the online tools. The platforms are also not forced to disclose too much about how much has been spent. All of that opens up the opportunities not only for not very honest political parties, but also to the third parties. But this is no news. Third parties have always been there. All around the European Union, there have been third parties operating at the times of the elections. Outside the European Union, there were always these foundations linked to some political actors that have been actually de facto third parties. So the phenomenon is not new in itself, it just that the online world creates more opportunities for it to flourish. The second example is foreign influence. We've always had foreign influence in the elections, maybe not as pronounced because, now geopolitics is such that the foreign influence is of a greater concern for all of us, but we've always had foreign influence in the elections. Going on example that I used, Moldova, for example, we've always had impacts from both the European Union side, some of the member states, and from the Russian side. It has always been the player in the political competition. But what differs now is that these foreign influence also goes undetected because the political finance is not only in the online world, is not detectable across the borders. Where the money actually comes from, you don't have to smuggle a suitcase full of cash any longer to have an impact as a foreign influencer. You can spend it on the online advertising through either your own entities abroad or your shell entities in the country. There's a variety of opportunities. But what to do about that? And I will... Yes, and I will get to the solutions here. I think one important thing that is happening, and we already see that, is that the civil society organizations are already leading the way in this effort. It is very often that the governments are lagging behind and they're catching up with what the civil society already is doing. A good example is Romania, where civil society organizations have done so much to disclose the political finance details that the government had to, and the regulators have to acknowledge that and face the reality and adapt their activities not to be seen as not doing their job. And I think that in many other places that also is the case. So I think where what we see in the online political finance is that there is a lot of data, but if you really want to build up the tools, you can build the tools to find out more about what is going on. And very often my impression is that the civil society organizations, citizen observers, are actually the ones who are first building the tools and then forcing the regulators to do more of what is really the responsibility of a regulator. So I think in terms of the solution, I think we do need to advocate for the participating states of the OSCE to involve the citizen observer organizations and civil society organizations in the process of developing the regulations and developing the tools, because the civil society organizations very often just simply know a lot more than what the governments know. Second thing is that for that to work, citizen observer organizations also need to be supported proactively, also from the European Union financing and also from the regulatory perspective, so that they can actually be equipped with resources to continue building these tools, which the government later will be forced, more or less forced, to start using. So in my opinion, when we're talking about this wealth of dispersed data, there is nobody better to advocate for its disclosure, reporting, and accountability for these financial flows than the citizen observer groups and generally the interested citizens. And on this, I finish because this is where in fact, our study also highlights for the case of the EU at the level of national and the EU level regulations.
Olga wants react
I just
directly.
have one example about social media advertising. OPORA started to monitor this space from 2019. Then we developed software which help us to gather in data, but not just because of our big group of analytics or monitors. Then National Agency for Prevention of Corruption asked us to train them how to work with this software. And then they sent an official request to help them develop official software, which will be officially used by this institution for monitoring social political advertising in social media. And now we on a process, because we have a case, we have some experience, and we already started to work with SOFT for gathering this data. And there are many such examples. That's why startups in NGO, how to use new technology for monitoring may be used even by authorities if they have political will to do these reforms or changes.
Thank you. Sylwester, you want to react directly to what was said, and if yes, and
if I can maybe
ahead.
extend, what Alex...
And maybe one question to you also, Sylwester. Because Alex mentioned Romania as a good example, and you've done a research comparison of the Polish and the Slovak system, both countries in the same region with the same political culture and history, and you've found out quite interesting differences.
Yeah, I just wanted exactly to extend that thought which Alex said about the Slovakian, political financing system and transparency of that. So there are some very interesting tools developed by lawmakers recently. One of them are transparent accounts. So basically, there's new service which is offered by banks for entities which are obligated to use those transparent accounts. And parties are obligated to use those services. Basically, party opens an account in a bank, and every income, every spending is published right away on the website. There's basically real-time reporting available to anyone. It's published on the bank site. That data can be later gathered by NGOs, which actually does happen, and there are very interesting comparisons, analysis, and conclusions coming out of that. Even simple things like, how much parties actually spending on the online campaigns versus what you see in the actual platform, right? That should be basically equal, right? So you can very easily verify that, yeah. So there are some very interesting movements in our region. Polish financing system is very similar, and the issues we have in Poland are quite similar to what we observe in Hungary. What we also observed in the recent elections, abuse or let's say, not the most effective use of public resources or resources owned by the public companies, working in favor of the ruling party, right? Basically, agenda of some of the NGOs and let's say gongos is very similar to agenda of the ruling party, and very often actually citizens are finding that in the end it's citizens who are paying for the political propaganda of the ruling party, right? Why it matters, I think, we can speak about some tools, and it would be nice to have that or another one, right? But why it matters, I think, is the key here. So even if we have some data, even in Poland, right, the issue is that we cannot correlate the data with anything, right? So having that presence of some separate source of information allows us to verify what we actually know from the public official reports from one side, and we can verify what we know from the press, what we found on ourselves, right? So we have, system with feedback, and we can challenge both sides, what we know officially, what we know unofficially, right? So that is very effective, very important for the civil society to have such tool available. Tool in not always on sense of some sort of software or technical solution, but sometimes as a legal framework.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the audience? We have still a couple of minutes for interventions from the audience. Questions? There is one question on the left side. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Spisielski from the Panteley Foundation, Polish NGO. My question is, if you are saying about new rules, my question is on which level of you're going to apply those rules, because online we have big tech companies. Sometimes it's they're outside the European Union. So on what kind of level you can adjust regulation that the corporations, big tech corporations, gonna apply those rules and to their to their corporate regulations, because most of those social media that we use they are US social media. So what are your ideas how to implement those new regulations? Because only setting them on the national level, I think it's not enough.
And this is a question to...
who would like to answer this?
Who wants to answer? Sylwester?
Yeah, if you ask about my opinion, in my humble opinion, that should be European level, because first, there is a whole variety of the parties. There's no direct connection between, if I establish new regulation, I will gain something, right? Like in the country level, right? That would basically directly, if you would establish something like that on the, let's say, Polish level, right, in Poland, there is always a chance that the other side will say that, okay, that regulations are actually done to harm us, to to
We'll see politics in this.
yeah, it's basically a matter of part of the political agenda then, right? In the European level, you're basically a little bit disconnected from that conflicts on the national level. And second, it gives you much more power to enforce those rules. And the third one, I think it's the most convenient way for the partners. I mean, I wouldn't look on social media or advertisement platforms as enemies. In the end, they already did something to bring some transparency, right? What we should do as a civil society is to discuss with them, debate with them what is doable, and I think European level is a good platform to do it, right? So this way we can also ensure them that there will be, if they apply some rules, those rules will be, let's say, also cost efficient for them, right?
Alex?
In short, I agree with the European Union level regulation, because that's the only way to actually enforce it through the sanctioning mechanism of the social media companies. But then two extra things here. I think that's an important question you're asking, but I think an even more important question is, are the governments actually interested in having that data available? Because my impression is that very often the regulators are not particularly keen on having this wealth of data available, because then once it is available, the questions will be asked, and they will end up with the task of actually enforcing some kind of expenditure ceilings and the role of the third parties and who is allowed to spend, who is not allowed to spend, when this advertising appears. All sorts of things will appear on the radar for the regulators. So in a way, yes, it should be probably enforced, but at the same time, the governments are not so keen to rush in this direction. And the second thing is that it might come as a surprise, but the political advertising is a loss-making exercise for the social media companies. I have been speaking to the executives in the Facebook and Twitter and other places. They say that the political content is a disaster for them. It's a loss-making exercise because of the reputational damages that it causes very regularly, and they're not getting so much money out of it. Compared to the rest of the market, it's just a sphere of the activity where they cannot avoid having advertising, and they are receiving money, but if they really want, if they really could decide, they would just get away from that business. So in a way, helping, I think it needs to be structured in a way that they need to be helped in a way to avoid the reputational damage. And the problem there is that there is a lot of reputational damage there for the political actors and sometimes even the governments.
There are two other questions, Stefanie, and then behind her, and one. Okay.
Maybe first the colleagues. Or I ask briefly, Stefanie Schiffer from the EPDE, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Olga, for being here and demonstrating us that Ukraine in war is still controlling the government, and this is amazing, and thank you very much for taking the time and being here. And to Alexander Shlyk, being author of this research, we commissioned it or organized it because we understand that this is a problem not only and maybe even less for transformation countries, but for established democracies, where we have a problem that established democracies are as a rule not so much under international scrutiny concerning their implementation of ODIHR recommendations. In Germany, we have a strange situation that we have standing recommendations from ODIHR on party finance control for 8 years. They are not implemented. Now we have a huge election reform. We have, after Chinese People Republic, we have the biggest parliament on the earth. It's going to be reduced now. This is the big electoral reform, but nobody is speaking about finance control. So I make it brief. We have now a challenge to bring our governments and our parliaments also to reform. And I would like to use the opportunity, not here, it's late now, but later, to discuss with you how we can together bring parties, bring our governments also in established democracies to come to this really dangerous question of intransparent party and campaign financing. And this is yeah, if it's time, maybe brief remarks from the colleagues. Otherwise, we could discuss that later because it's really a concern for the established democracies to have more transparency. Thank you.
Yeah, so we had only 1 hour time slot here, and we are running out of time. So maybe last comment, if there is one, and the questions, maybe one question, and then final comments, and we have really stop at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Nana Kalandadze from International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Thank you for a great side event, momentous, timely topic. My question is related to the third-party issue, or the third-party challenge, rather. And of course, it is in direct relation with the campaign finance issues, but also not only, right? One reflection I want to share in this connection is that I think there is probably a shared understanding that when we look at the Eastern Partnership or the Eastern sort of region of democracies, there's generally been a problem of open campaigning on behalf of or by third parties, generally, right? I mean, I think from what I recall in the past, sort of 10 years, it always had to be hidden, right? I mean, there's a general culture that, if you're campaigning on behalf of somebody, you better do it, sort of, kind of, in secret. While in the EU or the sort of established Western democracies, we do have this more open culture of, sort of coming forward to say, we campaign for this issue or for these forces. So I think that general lack of culture of, openness on behalf of the third parties has been a problem, but then now it's all taken over by the online challenge too. What do you think is ultimately a solution to the third-party challenge? Alex, you might be, and Olga and others might be also, maybe familiar with some of the UK practices, for example, where they are required to be registered as third-party campaigners. I don't know of that practice at all anywhere in Eastern European countries. So what could this be? And I think it will then also somehow help partly regulate the online behavior of third parties. So yeah, that's, sorry for a long question.
Olga wants to start.
Yeah, I'm going to answer in a quick manner. What we are doing with social media, we try to understand connections and coordination in between different pages. When we have our monitoring, we see what type of pages produce the same messaging in the same or very close time to the same audience and so on and so forth. And we have evidences why these pages or groups are working together. Then we can use these evidences and to apply to national police with that information, that there are a huge amount of third parties who are playing on campaigning, but unofficially. That's why we need to documentize this type of violation. But according to Ukrainian legislation, all third parties are illegal. That's why it's very easy to understand who are officially may use money and sources and financial resources for advertising. Other third parties, all of them are illegal. But what is the real problem in social media? As for me, it's not money. As Alex mentioned, it's a very small sum of money for big players. The main problem that social media doesn't produce clear and transparent rules. They are changing that rules on a daily basis, and you don't know what is going on now. For example, Facebook closed their access to advertising on some of the territories which are still under the Ukrainian government control, but they decided that, according to their understanding, that oblasts or regions of Ukraine where we have battlefield, but they are under Ukrainian authorities' power, they have been blocked for advertising. How to produce awareness to people, how to have access to these people. Many of them don't have access to internet, but some of them have access to internet. So, but Facebook decided that these territories and civilians have to be cut from advertising area for Ukrainian society. What does it mean? It's a shock, because these big groups playing political roles, and it's about security already. The same story about so-called sensitive content. Oh, yeah. But they are blocking even photos with young girls which are staying with the photo of her dead father. It's not about bloody bodies and so on and so forth. Someone decided that it's sensitive content. That's why we have to talk not just about transparency of money, because it's a small puzzle of smallest puzzle in this picture of problems. And we have to play on the global level. I believe that in the future, we have to produce not just like advocacy or negotiation between stakeholders, but we have to establish something like special European Court for Human Rights, but about digital rights, because we will not have opportunity to form our political will, because we will not have, through these bubbles, access to the information. And this is worrying me even more, because money are more or less transparent, and we have already understanding how YouTube has produced their rules, as Facebook, why not, and others, because we have already practices which can be used by other social media groups.
Alex, we are on the global level now.
Two things. I'll repeat the key message. I think that the civil society is actually at the moment leading the way in terms of creating the tools and creating the pressure on the systems to reform themselves. And the second thing is that it's good that we're talking about it now, because if we are optimists, and I think most of us are optimists, then we should be expecting that this issue will become more and more prevalent and more important, because, you know, looking at my own home country in Belarus, we don't really care so much about the online political advertising right now. We have bigger issues, yeah? And same with, say, Azerbaijan. But in countries that are moving ahead in a good direction, like Ukraine, like Moldova, like Georgia, like Armenia to a certain extent, this is becoming an issue, and that's good news. That, you know, when you have a developing electoral process, you're caring about bad voter lists, you're caring about ballot box stuffing, but when you progress, you start caring about political finance. So if we are optimists, then we should be expecting to deal with this topic more and more in the future. So it's good that we're starting the way, and we have leaders in the field of civil society already paving the way forward with this.
Alex, I will always invite you to all those discussions, because you have the ability to end with the optimistic accent at the end. It's great. Thank you very much. No summary, no comment from my side, because we are running out of time. I promise that we will book 3 or 4 events next time here and continue this and other discussions from our election monitoring bubble. Thank you very much. Yeah. And have a nice conference.
I'm inviting you to the next site event about pseudo-referendum on occupied territories at 3:30.
We'll be there.
Thank you.